Hey there, I'm Kevin from kevinsguides.com and welcome to the third video in the Joomla 4 template development series. In this lesson, we're going to actually look at getting the template styled and working the way we want it to. So the agenda is to first get the menu system working, then we're going to set up SAS again with our template style sheets. We're going to examine index.php in greater detail. We'll take a look at Bootstrap 5 and some basic layout components such as the flex grid and columns. We will place modules and components on the page. And again, we'll look at adding custom CSS with SAS. So without further ado, let us begin here. So recall that we have a test site set up with the J4 starter template. And if I go into the backend here, the first thing I want to actually do is just fix this menu because it's kind of bothering me. So if I go to site modules and I take a look at this main menu blog in the menu position, J4 starter actually has a module override for the menu system and it will make it work with Bootstrap. All I had to do is set the start and end level from 1 to all to 1 to 2 because it only supports up to 1 level deep. Go to the advanced tab and change this from collapsible dropdown to just from module default. And that was set to collapsible dropdown because of the blog import that I did in, I think, was at the first video where we set everything up. So for future purposes, whenever you need to make a menu, if you want to use the menu system that I've included here, all you have to do is create a new menu module, publish it to the menu position, set the layout to default, and set that start and end level from 1 and 2. So let's save and close that, refresh the home page, and now I have a better looking menu with that 1 level deep system working as well. So that is all fine and dandy. The next step is going to be to get SAS up and working. So before we do that, let's go to our Joomla root, open it with code again, or if you have a saved workspace, go ahead and open that workspace. I'm not sure if I saved this workspace. Yes, I don't think I did. So let me just save this workspace as under Joomla Toot. I'm just going to say that's fine, Joomla Toot code workspace in the root directory. I have index.php open here. That's not what I want to look at quite yet. What I want to look at is the getting the style sheet working because we're going to be going back and forth between the code here and the style sheet and the site preview quite a bit. So under the templates directory, not the template in the media folder. So go to site root, media, templates. Recall that this is where the CSS and SAS files go. Templates, site, J4 starter, and I have this SCSS folder, right? So if I go to template.scss, this is going to be where we can put all of our custom CSS for this template. Now, ideally, we would organize this using import statements, and maybe we will do that as well as we kind of work along here. Let's just take a look at this SCSS file before we compile it. So what we have at the top here is some Bootstrap stuff. It has a local copy of Bootstrap 5.1 included, and that is under this SCSS vendor folder slash Bootstrap. I have all the source SCSS files for Bootstrap here, and we want to add this to our template. Since our template is loaded from template.min.css in the CSS directory, that's this guy here, and it's already precompiled, but we're going to recompile it. We want that to load the Bootstrap CSS files as well. Let me just go back to that. So that's what's going on here. This way I can change Bootstrap variables, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute, and that'll allow us to make some pretty drastic and quick changes to the website. Now, as of the time of this video, I'm loading Bootstrap 5.1. I believe that's the same copy that is included with Joomla. So that's probably the best version to use for now. If you want to use the later version of Bootstrap, you could go ahead and download it. It probably won't make any huge differences. Most of the core components still work the same in Bootstrap 5.3 and for the foreseeable future. But for now, let's leave that all as is and just work on compiling it. So for testing purposes, let's just say I want to make the background of the entire site blue again, kind of like we did in that first video. So I'm going to say body background blue here. And then I'm going to compile all this. So again, I want to take this template.scss file. I want to include Bootstrap. I want to include my own CSS here. And I want to compile this all into this template.min.css file that ultimately gets loaded by the template. So to do that, we need to use Sass. The easiest way to get a terminal window open from VS Code is to just right click the directory you're in. And there's actually an option here to open an integrated terminal. And that's the easiest way to do this. This will automatically take us to the directory that we right clicked on. So in this case, I want to turn template.scss into template.min.css. But notice that they're in different directories here. So I have my CSS folder here, and I have my CSS folder here. So I want to go up one directory into the CSS folder and put template.min.css there. So let's make a command that does that. So recall, we have Sass, and that's just telling us to use Sass, template.scss, colon, and then we have to say where we want to put it. So right now we're in the SCSS directory. We want to go up one directory, so that's just dot dot. And in Windows we use backslashes, though I think forward slashes would work fine too here, slash CSS. So dot dot just means go up one directory. So go to the J4 starter directory and then go back down into the CSS directory. And then we're going to do template.min.css. And we're going to add this actual kind of like option argument at the end here, dash dash style compressed. And what style compressed does is that makes it a minified template CSS file. So actually, yeah, let's just go ahead and run that. And we will see that we get an error. So yes, this came from Bootstrap actually. And it's just because I'm using in a slightly older version of Bootstrap, but just because it's depreciated, I think it will still work fine. Let's take a look at template.min.css under that media folder in templates, site, J4 starter, CSS. And right now, in my time, it's 10:50 a.m., so I know that that file was updated. It's kind of hard to tell just by looking at it because it's so long. It's got all of Bootstrap CSS in there, and it's got my CSS in there. Let's go back to the template, and if I refresh this, you'll see that it's still white, and that's probably got something to do with the cache. So it's probably saved a cached version of my old CSS file that I loaded before. So what I actually want to do here is go into the developer tools, and that's Control-Shift-I in Chrome or Edge-based browsers. And let me just close that. We want to go to the Network tab and make sure Disable Cache is checked here. And now if I refresh, it updates that CSS file, so it's no longer cached. And it's probably useful just to leave that open on the side. But we can see it loaded that blue background just like we wanted it to, right? So we have the CSS working. But what happens if, say, I want to delete that background, right? If I go back to template.scss and I no longer want it to be blue, I save that. If I refresh, it's not going to do anything because I did not update my template.min.css file. Now, I could go back to the terminal and I could hit the up arrow and rerun the command every single time I make a change, which is certainly something you can do. But the easier option here is to, after Sass, we can add another argument, dash dash Sass dash dash watch. And what this will do is it will watch the entire template.scss file for any changes, and when it detects a change, it automatically will update the files for us. So now if I say like I want to do body background black for some reason, it's not going to look good, but I do that. I control S and save, and we can see it says compile template.scss to template.min.css. Go back home, refresh, and we can see now it's black. So that is a more effective way of compiling our Sass files into template.css. All right, next on the agenda is to, well, let's delete that real quick, back to the base layout. Next on the agenda, we are going to actually look at index.php in a bit more detail here. So I'm just going to kind of move this guy down here so we can barely see it. And in index.php, again, that's in site root, templates, J4 starter, index.php, we have some PHP code at the top. So if you're unfamiliar with PHP, now we're going to start talking a little bit about it. As I said in the first video, you don't need to know a ton about PHP to get through this. You just need to learn a few basic things here. So we have our starting PHP tags here. So that's just the lesson sign, a question mark, and the letters PHP. That just means start some PHP code. So anytime we want to include PHP in a document, we want to use this opening and closing PHP kind of tags around the PHP code. PHP files themselves, really, they're really just standard HTML files. They have PHP as their extension, but they're text files just like HTML files, and the server mostly treats them like HTML with the added coding abilities of PHP kind of like inserted in there. You could think of it almost as like for templating, you can just use PHP and HTML. You can go back and forth pretty much however often or little you want. If I wanted, I could make my entire template in PHP without really writing any standard HTML in the form of HTML. There's ways I could do that, but that doesn't make sense. It's much easier to just include the important PHP stuff at the top, then end the PHP section, make my main layout and template in standard HTML, and then if I want, I can use more PHP tags in the HTML and kind of add things using PHP as I need to. So whenever I want to create dynamic content in my website, like whenever I want to load a module or a component on my page, I want to do that using PHP. But I want the rest of the page, the layout, the heading, all that stuff, I want all that to be done in HTML. So I hope that makes sense. All right, let's start reviewing some of this PHP towards the top here. So the first line you'll see is define JX or die, and that just stands for execution, Joomla execution. Basically, this means it's a security measure. It's saying if we try to access index.php itself under templates J4 starter index.php, like if I go in my browser and I just try to access that file by going to templates slash J4 starter slash index.php, what we should get is nothing, or either that or like an error message. And the reason that it's loading nothing instead of a page like is actually in the code is because of this define jexec or die. So this is saying only Joomla is allowed to execute this PHP code. So only Joomla should be able to open this file. So users shouldn't be able to just type it in their browser and go to that file because it's kind of like an internal file that we don't want them to access or view directly. So that's important. And that should be at the top of pretty much every PHP file for any extension you ever create in Joomla. Next down here, we have some use statements. And And this is basically a way of saying that we have some like objects. This has to do with programming and object oriented design. We're not going to get into that too much, but these are some important things that we need to make this template work. We need to use Joomla CMS Factory, HTML helper, text URI. That stands for like URLs or links. Those are all objects that the template needs to function, and that's all you need to know about that for now. So just leave those as is. App and WA. So app is the Joomla application itself. It has certain functions we can use. We're not going to get into that in great detail, so we can kind of just leave that as is and ignore it for now. Um, WA, this stands for the Web Asset Manager, and anytime you see a money sign in PHP, it means it's a variable. Variables can represent values or objects, but basically these are just objects that do things. We can think of it like that. So we have an app object and a Web Asset Manager object, and we use that Web Asset Manager to load things from joomla.asset.json. And again, we haven't had to change a single line of PHP code yet. I have included all of this for us, so we really don't have to do much. The next line here, that adds our fave icon from the images folder under the media directory, so we can change that down the road if we want to update how this little thing up here that says replace me looks in the tab. These active variables, again, don't worry about that for now. Just leave those as is. These contain useful values that you might need in the future regarding like changing certain things. The only thing we'll really be using here, if I remember to include it, is this page class variable. And this allows us to define special classes or CSS classes from the menu item and just kind of inject those into our pages as needed, which is a useful thing to have on any template. The test parameter, this is to deal with that config file that I discussed in the last video where I showed you in the backend under the styles. We had that one configuration radio button that could kind of just turn on and off. So under site template styles, I had JForce starter. Under the advanced tab, there's this parameter that just turns on and off, and it has values of either 1 or 0. So this is actually the variable that gets that information, and we can do something with that. So really, I don't need this for now, but we can just leave that as is. The templates path, so this is another thing that's useful to have. It's just a variable that holds the path to the template, and in this template, it's just template/j4 starter. So leave that as is. JHTML, Bootstrap.framework, and jQuery.framework. So this is using the JHTML class or the JHTML object. It's calling a function to load the Bootstrap framework and jQuery framework. We're not going to be using jQuery in here. jQuery is a little dated. It's still an okay framework. It's not inherently wrong to use it, but modern web design, we don't use it anymore for in most cases. It's used a lot in back end still, but in front ends we try to avoid it for like performance reasons. Anyways, so we can remove that line, but we want to leave this Bootstrap framework here, and that's because this is a line that loads a copy of Bootstrap's like JavaScript files from Joomla's system folder. I believe it's either a system or a vendor. It's some folder, I think, in the media folder. But basically, leave that alone. We want that to load important Bootstrap files because without that, if I was to get rid of that, like things like this drop down menu here, that would stop working. I'm not sure this menu here that might stop working because that is like dependent on Bootstrap's JavaScript files. So we need those, even though we have loaded our Bootstrap CSS files using the template.scss file. The JavaScript is separate, so we need to leave that alone. For the Web Asset Manager, recall WA stands for Web Asset Manager, and that was defined back up here. This is just saying to use some scripts and styles that we defined in joomla.asset.json. So if I go to joomla.asset.json, you can see I have things like template.j4starter.scripts. That loads a template.js file from the media folder. Template.j4starter.mainStyles. This loads the template.min.css file that we created from the media folder. So this is the lines that are actually saying, hey, go to this Joomla asset.json file and load these files onto the page. So if I was to get rid of those lines and reload my homepage, you'll see that all the style and the important JavaScript or whatever that I had in that template.js file, that is now gone. So I want to just leave that as is. The final thing we have is how Joomla sets the viewport. And we could set this manually ourselves in the head section if we wanted to. But Joomla has a method that's defined to do it. So we're just saying the standard viewport tag with a device width and an initial scale of 1. So again, I didn't really change anything up here other than deleting the jQuery line, but that is what all that PHP does. So the next thing we're going to do is start looking at the actual HTML for this template. We're going to delete a lot of this and kind of start from scratch. Remember, we are trying to go for this layout here where we have the header, menu, breadcrumbs, content area, and sidebar. So we want to kind of style this a bit differently than how it's set up right now. And just refresh that. Okay, good. Like any HTML document, we have a head section, and this is where we're supposed to load our styles and scripts. So JDoc include type equals styles, and JDoc include type equals scripts, and metas. This is saying load the metadata, like the viewport, load the styles, like these style lines, and load the scripts, like the scripts. So basically, this is saying, hey, go back to the web asset manager and again do these things that we need. It's kind of like just injecting that into our HTML. So that can stay the same, that can be left alone. The body class equals site, PHP echo page class. Where we want to put this page class is up to us. I think it actually makes sense to put this in like a main section probably, but we can get into that later. We have a header section, the main section, and a footer to start off with. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete a lot of this. I would encourage you to follow along. Let's delete the footer. Let's leave the debugging module down there. Let's just get rid of this entire main section. And for the header at the top, let's get rid of everything except for the main menu module. So this whole section here, this nav element, this is the Bootstrap nav bar that I created for J4 Starter, and that's the part we just want to leave alone. So let's get rid of the rest of that though, and let's just save this and refresh. And all that we should see now is the menu. So we have the site name, which is included along with the menu. Take a look at what is going on here. So in the header section, what I'm doing is I'm generating a Bootstrap navbar using Bootstrap's navbar component and the classes that go along with it. So how did I learn how to do this? Well, if you ever want to look at the Bootstrap API, which I would encourage you to get a little familiar with, go to getbootstrap.com under docs. We can see we have all these useful components related to layouts and forms and stuff. But specifically, the one I'm looking at here is a navbar. And if we look at Bootstrap's documentation, you can learn how it works, what classes you need to use, and all that good stuff. So this one here looks pretty similar to what I have here. I have a navbar expand large, background body tertiary. So this is saying that this is a navbar. It's expanded on the large viewports, and we'll get into Bootstrap's viewport sizing in a bit. And the background is tertiary color. What color did I use? I used the background color of dark. I use the class navbar dark because I want it to be a dark navbar. Let's say instead I want this to be a different color. I could just change this class from background dark to background primary, bg-primary. That's the Bootstrap class for the primary color. And the primary color that Bootstrap uses out of the box is this kind of blue color. So if I want to make it blue, all I have to do is set that to blue. If I want it to be a lighter navbar, if I don't want to use a contrasting color, I can get rid of that navbar dark class. And let's just say I use BG-light. So that's the background color light. I refresh that. Now we can see the text change to blue and the background change to light. So that's how easy it is to swap between styles and colors using Bootstrap. And we're going to keep learning more about these classes and components as we continue through this tutorial. Let's begin to look at the layout of the website. So an important thing here with this navbar that I've included, and you can set this to BG light and navbar and remove that navbar dark class if you want, or if you like that dark class, you can put it back or leave it as it was. So in my example, I can have like a dark header up there. So I think I'm going to go back to using a navbar dark and a BG dark here. And that's more in line with what I had in my preview. Right. So that is good. This line here is pretty important. So it says PHP of this count modules menu. What this line is doing, again, we have some PHP code. It's saying if the menu module exists, so we have that menu position that was defined in template details.xml as we talked about in the last video under this position tag or position element. We're telling Joomla, hey, if there's a menu module published and it exists on this page, then that's what this colon says. It's saying then kind of spew whatever comes out and spew this out. So it spews out this div. And the most important thing here is JDoc include type as modules, name as menus. So if there's a menu module, put this div here, include the menu module, close the div, and then this PHP endif is just saying that's the end of this statement. So anything I put after here just continues being kind of printed or displayed as normal. But if there wasn't a menu module published, then this code in the middle would not have been executed. And we can put however many lines of HTML we want between this if and end if. You can think of that as kind of like a section of code that gets executed only if this condition appears true. All right, continuing on here. So before I forget, let's take a look at one other important line of PHP code. Where did I put you? Yes, PHP echo site name. So part of Bootstrap's navbar is this navbar brand class, and that allows you to just put your name or your site name in the navbar. That's kind of what that's designed for. So my name of this site is template dev demo, and all this is saying here when we use that echo command, it's saying print out the site name variable that I got back up in the top section of the code. So you don't need to know how the top section works, but you do need to know this. If you want to include the site's title, all you need to do is PHP echo site name. And that's if you're using J4 Starter. If you're using a different template, you're going to have to figure out how that works. Anyways, continuing on, let's look at the layout here and let's begin to work on the header a bit. So rather than having the heading or the site title in the menu like I have it now, in this layout that I went for here, I have it kind of up in the top area. So let's focus on making this top area from the main menu and up. So we already mostly have the main menu ready to go. We just need to get rid of the site title and move it up to the top. Make the background for the top section black. How do we do that? Well, first let's look at this layout. If I draw a box around this, you can kind of see I have this container and everything is contained within this area. Nothing, there's kind of like this padding or the space to the left and right of everything. And we actually have a Bootstrap class that enables us to do this, and it's quite simply the container class. So let's look at that. There's a few different types of containers, and for the menu, it has a container dash fluid, and we actually can edit this. So we have the header, right? And let's just make the entire header bg class equals bg black. So I'm making the header black. And then I'm going to have a div. And I'll just leave it with nothing for now. So I have div, closing div tag. And let's just do, for demonstration purposes, h1. This is my site title. So I'm going to put the site title up there. We'll save that. We'll refresh it. So now I have black at the top. I have the menu beneath it like I wanted. Oh, we're still not quite there yet. We have a few other things we need to do. Part of this, you'll see that everything is left aligned here. It's going all the way to the left side of the page. So I need to use that container class that I mentioned a second ago. Now under header, I still want that header to be black all the way across, but I want a separate section, div class equals container and slash div, right? So I want to put everything that I already have, the menu and that site title that I just made, I want that all to go into this container class. So I'm just going to cut and paste that. So now it's all in that container. And to make this look a little nicer, let's just make sure we are indenting everything so we can see the structure fairly easily here. And now when I refresh the home page, we can see that everything has been kind of center aligned. And we have a little bit of padding on the left and right. If I get rid of my dev tools, I close that here, we can see it gets a little larger. If I zoom out, we can see that the container just kind of goes from the edge here to the edge here, and it leaves a nice amount of white space on the sides of the page. That looks pretty good. But in my demo, remember, for my prototype or design here, it looks like that gray area I had going across with the main menu actually stretched all the way out to the left and right. And of course, I had to move that site title. So let's fix that. Let's make this gray area behind the nav bar stretch all the way across the page while we still contain the template or the menu itself within that container. So to do that, we're actually going to have to reorder some things again. So let's take this nav class and actually let's just leave that. Let's cut that. And what we'll do here, we'll actually move this below the header class. We'll do another class here. Div class equals bg, I believe it's, did I use bg dark there? So I'll do another class that's bg dark below the header, and I will paste my nav bar in there. And yes, I did use bg dark. And I will also add another container. So div class equals container slash div, and I'll put my nav bar, my navigation menu in that container. So now I have a header at the top. Below the header, I have kind of like the menu section, and that's going to be, instead of a background color of black, we're using a background color of dark. Again, these classes are coming from Bootstrap. So for now, you're just going to have to remember them, but if you ever want to look them up, it's all available in the Bootstrap docs. Go to helpers. Under the Bootstrap docs, there's a whole section on the different color classes that we are allowed to use. Anyways, did I remember to save that? And let's refresh. All right, now we are getting somewhere. But the issue now appears that there is a white line going through the black section and the menu section. Before we get rid of that, let's actually move our site title and make it dynamic and replace "this is my site title" with the site title that we get with PHP. All we need to do is let's just cut this, or you can even just drag it. We could drag that into that h1 tag and get rid of this is the title. Refresh, and now it says template dev demo up there. But we have kind of this weird gap. That's because I didn't remove everything that was part of that navbar brand class. So let's just remove that entire line. Save, refresh. Now we're starting to look a bit better. We're definitely getting somewhere here. Next thing I want to do is kind of determine what is causing this white line to appear there. Now, I'm sure it has something to do with Bootstrap, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure what class is actually causing it. So I'm going to use my inspection tool and kind of try to find out what is causing that padding to appear there. So we have that, we have the container. It might have something to do with the container or the header. So does this have any type of padding? So if I just go to this top area, I can just start modifying things and just kind of test out some stuff. So if I set that to padding 0, margin 0, okay, that didn't do anything. If I go to header, the header element, I set that to padding 0, margin 0. Okay, that didn't do anything. So I know it's not either of those two elements that are at least the root cause of the problem. If I increase the padding of that header, what happens? Okay, so that's interesting. So that definitely did something to help us with kind of removing that white line, but I still don't think that that is directly the cause. See, if I go to 1 pixel, it does kind of extend it. So maybe it does have something to do with the actual header class or the header section, and maybe it has something to do with something that's inside of the container. But honestly, I don't really care about that too much because I still want to line up this edge here where it says the template demo. I want that to kind of better align with the side of the menu here. So to do that, we can actually use a helper class. Since I already know that if I modify the header class and kind of give it some type of padding, it's automatically just going to fill in that space. Bootstrap has some padding classes we can use, so I don't have to manually go in and change the CSS. I can just go back to this header class, and I can add another class list to this, and I can just do like P1. And this is the first padding setting. I think it's padding 1 rem is what it uses out of the box. Let's see. So now it did. I refreshed. We can look at the header class. It has that P1 in there. And okay, so it uses 0.25 rem. Let's try to make this a little bigger. Let's go with padding 3. So I'll just do P-3 on the heading class. And that is I like how there's a bit more space here, because if we look at if we look at the demo site that I had, or the template that I'm kind of basing this off of, we had a decent amount of space at the top, and I kind of like how that looks. Let's go ahead and actually use a different padding class here. So what I'm going to use is PB1 and PT, let's do 5. 5's the highest number, I think, that it includes out of the box. So PB, now it's just saying padding on the bottom is going to be 1, padding on the top is going to be 5. So use more padding on the top than the bottom. Refresh that. Hey, I kind of like that. That looks a bit closer to what we originally had. And let's see if we can do something about this lining up on the left here. So if I want to add a bit of padding maybe to that H1 element, if I do padding, see padding left and 0.25 rem, what's that look like? Not quite enough. So we want that to be like something a bit higher. 1.25, maybe 1 rem is what we want. So let's go ahead and do, for the H1, we'll add a class to that, and we'll do padding ps-2. And that as instead of like PL-2 for left, it's PS, and that just stands for start. So padding start. And the opposite of that would be padding end, so PE2. So for our padding classes on most directions in Bootstrap, we have PB, PT. So we have bottom is B, top is T, S is left, and E is right. So PS3 on that H1 class seems to look pretty good to me. That seems to line it up pretty nicely with the menu. The last thing I want to do here is make that H1 class. I want to make this white. So let's do text white. That's a text color class. And that just takes our site title there and makes it white. So now we have something that looks pretty close to the demo. We have our main menu, our header with the site title. That's all fine and dandy. Next thing below that is the breadcrumbs. Now the breadcrumbs is like the you are here section. It says like you are at this page, you are at this page. It's kind of like a easy way for users to see where they are on the site. Let's make sure we have the breadcrumbs published by going to templates under the site modules, or the back end, the site modules, and breadcrumbs is automatically published to the breadcrumbs position since I installed that blog sample data. Let's go back to index.php. And let's do the same thing we did with the containers and the heading and the menu, where I kind of centered that using that container class. And note too, container is a responsive class, so when I kind of like make this page smaller and smaller, the width of the container changes to the page, but we don't have any horizontal left to right scrolling going on. And the nav bar automatically collapsed down thanks to that code that I had in that nav bar element. And that comes from Bootstrap again. So what did we do to get the items centered in the container before? Well, first, we look at this here. So I went with a white background on the breadcrumbs. Let's make that a little different. Let's just make the breadcrumbs, just add a little color to this design here. Let's say we want that to be blue. So now I need to do another class, div class equals background. Remember that with Bootstrap, primary color is blue out of the box. And that's just default. We can change that in the settings for Bootstrap later, and I'm actually going to show you how to do that. But for now, let's just leave it background primary. So we're creating another div below the menu. We want it to be blue, and we want it to go all the way across. And then inside of that div, we want a container that contains the breadcrumbs module. And to load the breadcrumbs module, well, we can do this the same way we loaded the menus module So we could just do JDoc include modules name is breadcrumbs. That would work. Or if you want to do it the right way or slightly better way, we could wrap the whole thing in this count. So let's just do it the easy way first, and I'm going to show you the difference and why we might want to wrap that with that if statement. But let's just copy this JDoc include modules line there and paste that in the container. And we're going to change the name from menu to breadcrumbs, which is going to match the position from template details and the position that's set in the module. I'll refresh that homepage there. And hey, we get you over here, home/blog. So that's fine and dandy. But what happens if I disable or unpublish that breadcrumbs module? If I refresh, it will completely disappear in this case because I didn't set any like additional padding or anything on that breadcrumb class that's containing everything. So if I do like P1 here with that background primary, now we can see that that blue line's still there where that breadcrumb module was. And that's because it doesn't do anything with this code. It's still printing out this BG primary class and that container class, even though there's nothing in the breadcrumb module position at the moment. And that's where that count function comes in that we saw earlier. So if we include this actually before we load anything that has to do with the breadcrumbs, so we could think of this entire section here, all these 5 lines as being like the breadcrumb section of the site. And we want to make this only appear when there's a actual breadcrumbs module to display. So what we want is to add this if this count modules breadcrumbs. So if the breadcrumbs module exists on this page, then we want to print out all of this stuff. And then afterwards, we have to close off every if statement that we do using this kind of format here with the PHP and then an end if followed by semicolon and the closing PHP tag. Now if I save this, I refresh, you'll see the blue line disappeared because there's nothing published to that position. I turn the breadcrumbs back on. It says, okay, I found breadcrumbs, so I'm going to go ahead and print out that HTML that comes between those lines, those 5 lines of HTML. I'm gonna go ahead and print that out. That's how that works. I think it looked better without that P1 class, so I'll just remove that. But let's actually do text white and link white and refresh. Let's see how that looks. So you're here. So why is this link still not the right color or a color that we want it to be? Well, it's a pretty easy fix. You see, we have this tons of classes that are just provided out of the box by mod breadcrumbs, by the breadcrumbs module. And we can customize this using CSS if we want. So I'm not doing an override of the, we could use Bootstrap classes here if we wanted to kind of fix this, but then we'd have to do a module layout override. I don't want to do that. I just want to do this quickly with some CSS changes. So we have that mod breadcrumbs class, and within that we have an A element that is this kind of like invisible blue color, and we want to make that white instead. So let's go to template.scss and let's add a new comment for breadcrumbs. And this is the mod breadcrumbs class. So .mod-breadcrumbs as we saw in the inspector there. And then in that we can do A, and then we could just set color to white. I save that. Since it's still watching for changes, we can see it was compiled. If I refresh, okay, good. Now it says you're here, home/blog. So that is good. But the blog, the text there from that li and the span, element, that is still kind of like this weird gray color. So in addition to making the links white, we could also make just spans white as well. I refresh. Okay, now the span is white. Now why is that little backslash or a forward slash actually? Why is that still looking kind of weird? Well, that's because we have the CSS selector with the breadcrumbs.scss coming from Bootstrap. So it's actually Bootstrap itself that's doing this. And that's because it has kind of a color that's such a gray there. The easiest way to fix this, we could just copy that selector as it is. And we could set that color to white too. Now all of the breadcrumbs area is white. If I go to a different page, like the login page, we can see it changes like it normally would. I can still go back home. Of course, I'm not displaying a component yet, so there's nothing to show. But we can see that breadcrumbs is working and it's styled mostly how I might want it to be. Okay, continuing on, we go down back to our preview. It's time for us to discuss how Bootstrap Grid works a bit. So I'm kind of going for this layout where we have a wider content area on the left and then a narrow sidebar on the right. And then when it is on mobile, this is important to note, when it's on mobile, I want the content area to be full width and the sidebar to kind of jump down to the bottom. And we can achieve this layout. Well, first, like the header and the main menu and all that stuff, we're going to put this all in a container. But within that container, we have the content area on the sidebar. And I'm going to achieve this using Bootstrap's grid system. Let's take a look at the Bootstrap documents for a better idea of how that works. So Bootstrap actually has a few different layout types of things we can use. So we've already been using containers, but what we want to look at is here. You'll see there's a grid with columns. There's actually two different grid classes. There's a Flexbox grid, which is a standard grid, and a CSS grid, which is a different type of layout using CSS grids instead of Flexboxes, and that has to be turned on in the Bootstrap variable settings, which we have not discussed yet. We're going to focus on using the standard Flexbox grids that we can see here. So in the first example on their website, Bootstrap has a container, which is just like what we're going to do. And then they have a row that defines where the columns go. And within that row, they have three of these column classes. And since we just did row, column, column, what that does is it creates a 3-column set of elements in that row. And then you can put whatever you want in each column within those column classes, of course. But that's if you want them all to be the same width. What we actually want to do is make it so that they're kind of different widths. We want like the left side to take up, let's review here. Let's say we want this main component or content area. We want that to be, I don't know, like 2/3 of the page, maybe even 3/4 of the page. And then we want the sidebar to fill in that remaining kind of narrower section. So we don't want all of our columns to be the same width. We want a wider column and a more narrow column. To do that, we have to use we use the same kind of syntax there. We're still going to use rows and columns, but we're going to define the widths of the columns using some other Bootstrap classes. The Bootstrap's column system, it's based on a 12 base 12 system. And I'm trying to see if there's any examples with all 12 column widths here. I don't think they have any. But basically, Bootstrap uses a 12 column system in which we have 12 columns that make up a grid or a row. So let's imagine that this box here that I just created, that is going to be a row, right? And within that row, we have 12 columns. So we have our first column, second column, third column, and it's a 12 column system. So let's just copy that a couple more times. Okay, so we have our six columns there, 6 columns there. And let me just extend this artboard out so I know it's not all on the page like it should maybe be. All right, so I have 12 columns here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I know they don't quite line up right, but we can ignore that for the sake of demonstrating. I can use the system to create any combination of column widths that I want. So let's say on my website, like what we're trying to do, let's say I want the main content area to be about that wide and the sidebar to be about that wide. Well, out of these 12 columns, then I want the main content area to be 9 columns wide. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then I want the sidebar to be 3 columns wide. The advantage of this 12 column layout is it lets us do things like this with a fair amount of flexibility. So if I wanted a half and half layout, I could do, say, 6 columns. Or if I wanted to do a 2/3 to 1/3 layout, I could do an 8 column and a 4 column. So that's the flexibility of using this 12 column layout versus, say, a 10 column layout, because it allows us to do things in both thirds and quarters in addition to any combination of those 12 columns that we can do. We can split it in half, we can split it into thirds, or we can split it into quarters, and that's most of what we're going to be doing here. For my site, I'm going to do we're going to do 9 and 3. So let's get that working. Back in index.php, after the container, let's go ahead and do div class row / div. So all of our columns are going to go between this row. And we want the first column, the column on the left, that's going to contain our main content. That's going to be column. And let's just start with column 9. So col-9 / div. So the main component's going to go here. And then to the right of that, div class col-3. So this is the remaining 3. 9 plus 3 is 12. And this is where the sidebar is going to go. So we have our main area and our sidebar. Now we know how to insert modules already. So let's just go ahead and copy the breadcrumbs module. And what name did we use for sidebar? Just sidebar? Okay, so the name is sidebar. So we stick our sidebar over to the right. And this goes in order from left to right. So we have column-9, column-3. Next step is going to be to load the component itself. And this is very similar to loading a module. The only difference is instead of JDoc include type equals modules, we do JDoc include type equals component. Okay? And before we do anything else too, let's do another JDoc include here. JDoc include type equals message. So it's important that we have this JDoc include type equals message somewhere on the page, because for things like user registration and maybe error messages, things like that, that comes up wherever we put this message. The component is the main component of the site, the main content area. Then we have the sidebar. Let's save that and refresh the template test environment. Now you can see, just like I was kind of looking for, we have this section off to the left with a um, taking up 3/4 of the page, and then the section off the right taking up the remaining quarter of the page where the sidebar modules are going to go. And for demonstration purposes, let's go ahead and put some things over there. So it's still using Cassiopeia's positions, and we want to use our JVor starter position, which is not sidebar dash right, it's just sidebar because we only have one sidebar. I save that, I refresh, and now we can see, okay, good. We have that sidebar off to the right, but we still have an issue here. And you probably already noticed this, but I did not remember to put that row within a container, and that's why it's taking the full width of the entire page. So it's important that I take this whole row, starting from there to there, and I include that in a container class. So we have container slash container. Of course, you don't have to use containers if you wanted to make your layout occupy the entire width of the page. That's fine too. There's plenty of sites that do that. But I want mine to all be uniform and centered in a container. So we do that, we refresh, and hey, now we got something that's looking pretty good. Starting to look very close to what we had in the original demo with this area off to the left and the right and our heading at the top. So we're getting somewhere. Hooray. Okay, let's zoom out and take a look at this a bit more. We still have kind of an issue where things aren't really lining up maybe the way I might hope they would. To fix that, we have a few different options. The easiest option is probably just going to be to add some padding around the main content area and the sidebar if we need to. We can maybe leave the sidebar as it is. But I do want to add some padding around this main content area here in the center. And speaking of main, it's always a good idea to use the main element. Oops, I'm so used to typing div slash main, main slash main. So since this is really like the main content of the page, we should really be putting that in a main element instead of a div. Of course, main function is just like a div, but it's just a kind of like an accessibility thing and an SEO thing. It tells search engines and other tools that hey, this is like the main content area, the main section of the page is where the articles and the meat of the site goes. So we have that in a main element, and we're going to add a class of, we can just make something up here. I'll try P2 and see how that looks. So padding 2, not too bad. Maybe a tiny bit more. Padding 3. Okay, great. So now everything pretty much lines up. The menu might be off by a tiny bit, but I do not mind. We have that, we have that. That is all good and dandy. But we are going to experience an issue with responsive layouts. So if I go ahead and shrink this down, you see that this is just getting narrower and narrower because I've not defined any like breakpoints on this column grid. If I was to preview this with inspector tools and go for like an iPhone SE, it could see on an iPhone that probably wouldn't be the best experience. You can't even, see what the username is by typing in the box. That's definitely a little janky. We don't want that. We want this to kind of wrap down to the bottom on smaller screens. And to achieve that, we can just add some extra column classes and define breakpoints. The Bootstrap has a few different breakpoints that it uses out of the box, and this is all explained in like the breakpoints of the layouts. So we have extra small, small, medium, large. Extra small and small is mostly for like phone screens. Medium, medium, small. That range is kind of like for tablets, and then large, extra large, and extra extra large. Those are all like desktop viewports. at least usually. Large might be like an iPad in landscape mode. Um, anyways, so when the screen width goes below a certain point, one of those breakpoints, we want this to just jump down to the bottom. And the easiest way to do that is to set the width of this with the Bootstrap column classes. We want both the main content area to have a width of 12 columns, so it just goes all the way across the entire page. And we also want the modules section or the sidebar to have a width of 12 columns on mobile. And when we do that, if we have two elements in a row that have these, if we go over that 12 column limit, so if we go 12 and 12, all it does is it takes the first thing and then say we have another thing with 12 columns that's over there. So we have our main area that's 12 columns wide, our sidebar that's 12 columns wide. It just automatically throws that or wraps that down to the next row. And that's what we're looking to do here. What we can do is define our default column first. So this is going to be col 12, col 12. So they're both going to be 12 columns wide. And then on large screens, we're going to make them 9 and 3. So we have our main component. It is 12 columns wide. And then when we get up to that larger breakpoint, when we get to the large screen sizes, instead of being 12 wide, it changes to 9 wide and 3 wide. I save that. Just refresh. Since we're on a big screen here, it's going to be the same. But as I shrink my page down, make it more narrow, we eventually get to a point. So this must be where that breakpoint was for large. So as soon as we hit that large breakpoint, we can see it kind of just jumps right down to the bottom of the page. And now it is in the bottom area there. And anyone on a mobile device would be able to fairly easily access and use that if they wanted to. So that is breakpoints with the Bootstrap grid. That is how you use layouts and how we will create a basic layout using Joomla and Bootstrap. All right, so we're getting close to the end here. We have a template that is mostly working pretty good. Let's just do a few more like minor styling things kind of outside of Bootstrap so you can see how that works. And then I'm gonna actually change some other Bootstrap settings so we can see how that works. So let's think, what's something we could do to make this a little more interesting? Let's say we want to add a border to this main section of our page using some CSS. Let's just do that for demonstration purposes. So back in templates.css, I still have that watch command running from earlier. Remember sass -- watch, and then I did that whole thing with compiling the SCSS to the template.min.css. And now I'm just going to do main border 1px solid black to start. And I kind of like to just start like easy, and we can refresh. And now I do have a border there. Hey, I like that. Let's give it let's maybe make it a little wider. And instead of black, let's go ahead and make it gray. And let's give that a border radius of 2rem, 2rem, 0, 0. Okay, so now the main section kind of has a little bit of a border to it. That looks good enough to me. So we'll leave that as is. And what else could we do to make this slightly more interesting? Maybe we could do something with the sidebar. You can make that like a different color. You can make it go blue all the way down, add some padding. Um, it's really up to you how you want to style all this. So hopefully I've shown you enough about basic styling. So let's go ahead and create a footer. That's the last thing I really want to do before we talk about modifying Bootstrap styles. Let's go and do this. So we'll just do div class equals what color should we make our footer? Let's just do background black for our footer for now. And we'll do text white again. Slash div. Don't do div class equals container because I want it contained within the same width. That's approximately the same as the rest of the elements of the site. And then I'll do footer slash footer. And I can do something like, let's say span and copyright 2023 Kevin Olson slash span. Save that. And let's add some padding to that footer. So div class is p3. All right, so quick review here. So what I just did is I created a div that is background black, text white. So we have a black box basically at the bottom of the page. Within that black box, we have a container. Within that container is the footer with a padding of 3 and that text that I just defined. So I refresh. Let's check out the bottom. And now I have this footer where I can put whatever I wanted. Of course, if you need to, you could include another module there for like a footer module. I have that in the positions file. So if I wanted to, I could just go ahead and paste that in there and footer, and now it would load any footer modules below that copyright text. Not sure if okay, so it did include one module already in the footer position, and that was just a basic menu. I could leave that like it is if you want. Now we have the footer. The last thing I wanted to talk about is modifying Bootstrap. And Bootstrap comes with a very nifty variables file that we can access. So under my site's media folder in the templates site, J4 Starter, SCSS, vendor Bootstrap, all the way down here, we have this underscore variables.scss file. And again, here's the directory at the top if you want to take a look at it. But this contains a bunch of different colors and variables that we can use throughout our templates files. Let's say instead of blue, if you've seen my actual website, Kevin's Guides, before, you'll know that I like the color purple. So let's say I want to make that purple, and there's some other settings down here around line 340 that we could just kind of turn on and off as needed. But let's do enable gradients. Let's turn that to true. And let's just actually save that with gradients turned on and see what that does. So when I do that, anything that has a color, like a colored component like buttons and nav bars, it kind of adds this gradient to it. You can see that because it only applies to the component and not the area surrounding it, that's why the gradient kind of doesn't exist on the left and right. But then as soon as we hit that nav bar element or component, the gradient's toggled on. And again, with the buttons and stuff, it normally adds some type of like a little bit of a gradient to that. Might not be entirely easy to see with that blue color there, but that is how that gradient settings work, and you have to look at the docs to see how all that other things work. Again, there are like a ton. There's probably like 1,000 different Bootstrap classes you can use, and the more you use Bootstrap, the more familiar the more familiar you'll get with it. Okay, continuing down here. This is a good thing to know, the grid breakpoints. So if you want to change the pixel width where it kind of snaps and cuts off breakpoints, or if you even want to add more breakpoints, you can do that. But what I'm looking for here is actually the primary color. And I'm just going to search for it because I don't know exactly where it is. Primary, primary, primary. Here it is. Okay, so back up at line 70. I went right past it. Right now the primary color is blue. Let's set that to indigo, which I believe is the variable it has in here. Yeah. And we'll just save that. And since This file, this Bootstrap file, is in the same directory as the template.scss file that we're already watching. Bootstrap's going to be watching that entire directory for changes. So once it saw me change a file under Bootstrap, it automatically updated that template file back in the root SCSS directory. Now when I refresh my website, we can see it went from blue to indigo. And just in case you have maybe a little bit of color blindness or something, let's make this a bit more drastic and change it from blue to red using the Bootstrap red variable. And now it's red. So anywhere I use that primary color, it's now red. Finally, we don't have to use the predefined color variables if we don't want to. If you wanted to, you could just do you could pick some color here, manually set it using a color picker. So if I wanted to do like this dark teal color as my primary color, I could do that too. So the limit there is really just how much you want to edit, how much you want to change Bootstrap. It's fully customizable. There are other important color classes such as a secondary color, success color, which is normally green, a warning and danger color, which is normally like yellow and red. You can change the light and dark colors. So if I wanted where I had like the navbar background BG dash dark earlier, if I wanted that to be black instead of gray, I could set this to be black. Um, so play around with this, change it as you want, and the more you get used to it, the more you use it, the more comfortable you'll get with it. All right, I hope you found this tutorial to be useful. In the next tutorial, we're going to talk about repackaging our template and rebranding our template. So if I don't want to call my template J4 Starter anymore, I want to call it something else, we're going to learn how to do that. And then I'm going to show you how to compress the file back into a package, and we can then upload it to any Joomla site and activate it, and it'll work and look more or less just like this. So thanks again. If you found this video helpful, please check out my website, leave a tip, subscribe. There were a few small changes I wanted to make regarding this template, so I'm going to create a separate video on that. If you're happy with your template and you've learned enough, you can continue on to the video about packaging it. Otherwise, I'm going to have kind of like a 3B video where I just go in and make a few small edits. Hopefully, that'll be a lot shorter than this video was. Thanks again. Bye.